and I wouldn't know what an alien was then anyway. And if I had hallucinated the whole thing, there were several problems with that, and as outlined in my book, is simply little children remember things vastly different than adults. And when I looked at this thing, I noticed it didn't have any clothes. Of course, I was stunned by its huge black eyes that were perfectly round. They were not elliptical, as you see in some of the Hollywoodized versions of this stuff, which the entities do seem to be having those type cosmic sunglasses or whatever they are. I suspect that they're an eye covering for various reasons. But mine had perfectly round eyes, large black eyes, and I suspect maybe my model was probably a Ford, as maybe everybody today got a Lexus version of it. I don't know.
Well, let me ask you, were these memories, are these like vividly in your recollection, or were these through hypnotic regression? Were they kind of released through hypnotic regression, or
I'm glad you bring that up. I have never had memory recovery techniques of any kind, like hypnosis or any other system for memory recovery. These are conscious memories of my own events. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't. They knew I was very disturbed because the next day, in fact, which is real unusual, they put me between them in bed that night so that I could, because they realized I was very frightened. And to my shock and amazement, I opened my eyes in the middle of the night, and there were two of them standing there at the end of the bed with my parents in bed. And they do a rather interesting thing. I just refer to it as, it's just a slang term. I say nuke everybody, and basically everybody can't wake up. And many abductees, wives, husbands, and so on, report this, that they either can't move, they're paralyzed, or they simply are awake and can't move, and even see the entities involved. But in this case, my parents couldn't wake up or anything. I took my little arm, and I hit my dad as hard as I could in the back numerous times to try to wake him up, and I kept hitting him on the spine because he was sleeping on his right side, and hurt my little elbow. The next thing I know, I was gone. And my parents never had a clue. And the thing I noticed about them, whatever they are, most, was that as a child, of course, like I said, is children remember things vastly different than adults do. In other words, when I saw the thing, I obviously saw it was pure white, and there was ambient light in the room from a little well house light out in our backyard, and I was on the back side of the house, this little frame home in Midland, Texas. And I was rather stunned to see that it didn't have a TT. And that's the way kids remember things. If something doesn't have clothes on, the first thing they would look at is see if it's male or female. And
gotcha.
I had no idea what the thing was. It didn't have a TT, it didn't have a belly button, and it didn't have those little things that we have on our chest.
A TT?
As an investigator,
I've never
after
heard that
30-some years of looking at this, I see it very vastly different. And to me, John, I see these things as, if they don't have a belly button, then they weren't born.
Right.
If they don't have a genitalia, they don't reproduce. If they don't have mammary glands, they don't nurse their little ones, if they had any. So it suggests to me that they might have been hatched, cloned, or even manufactured, or some variant thereof.
Now, let me ask you this. I mean, as a child, I'm sure this is going to stick with you throughout your life, and since then, you are the Derrel Sims today is labeled by CNN as being one of the top 3 abduction researchers out there. What point in your life did you say, I want to find out what's going on, who these creatures are, or whatever? What was that turning point for you?
My turning point was approximately 16 years old. I was in high school, and there was a psychology teacher there, Mr. Kent Gwynn, and he and I just partnered up basically, and were just fascinated with the phenomena of scientific anomalies. UFOs was only one of many, and I was always amazed that science would pretty much turn a blind eye to some of this stuff that just made no sense, because there was good, solid evidence that something was actually happening. then I was about 16, age 17, my last major event happened, which was quite violent, and I told my girlfriend about it, and she looked at me like a calf looking at a new gate, kind of like, well, what happened to you? And finally took me to my psychologist friend, and he sits there and listens to the story, and he is just aghast. Now, here I am telling a story of events, of things that we're studying, and he's just stunned.
Yeah.
And he says, well, you've had this terrible, terrible dream. And I looked at him like he was mentally ill.
Yeah.
And I said, I just told you what happened. Don't look at me like I just made this thing up. I said, he said, well, it was just a dream. I said, well, first of all, if it was a dream, I said, in our house, and he had been there before, I said, we live in an old-style military barracks that had been converted to a home, and it still had the old military locks, square locks on the doors. And whatever it was that came into the home that night kicked the door in. The door opens inward, so I didn't sleepwalk and kick the door outward because the door opens inward. The lock's laying on the floor. My dad asked me the next morning how did I break my door, and so on. And it is interesting that no one ever woke up to hear such a huge calamity.
Wow.
So I said, none of this makes sense. And I said, I was wide awake during the event. I assure you I was not sleepwalking. And I had eyes as big as silver dollars whenever those entities came through that door.
And how old were you at this time?
Sir?
How old were you at this time?
I was 17. That was my last event.
Okay. All right. And then after that, when did you start researching?
Well, at that point, I later went to graduated and went to New Mexico State University and started doing my investigations privately. I kept a lot of it pretty quiet because I didn't want the stir that I had with the psychologist friend, and I just wanted to look at and see if other people had experiences like myself. And I found that a number of amazing things, even some things that might even suggest genetic engineering was taking place among some witnesses as far back as 66 at New Mexico State University, some abductees there. One of them in the Associated Students, the secretary there was in the Associated Students. And I was just shocked. So I volunteered to the military during this time, went into the military, kept on my investigations privately, and while I was in the CIA, I actually met a number of people, some of them from, one of them was a professor from the famous William and Mary College there in Virginia, and remarkably, one of his daughters was an abductee, and she told me some stories that just straightened my hair. And again, these are people who there was no one to report to back then, so to speak. Couldn't go to the police.
Yeah, really.
And you probably better not go to your local pastor or priest. Get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, really. Now, were all these obviously violent recounts of stories? Was there any positive stories that you were hearing, or was this primarily...
You bring up an excellent point. There seems to be two categories of people in this phenomena. One is referred to the abductee, which means these are people who are taken against their will. They don't like it. They felt violated and so on, and some of them felt a lot worse than that, like Travis Walton. Then there's another group of people who are also taken, but for whatever reason, and it's, in my opinion, the alien Stockholm syndrome, it simply means that these people are blinded by the experience and actually believe that their experiences were quite positive, wonderful, and so on. And two stark illustrations of this as investigators is myself and probably the late Dr. John Mack.
Derrel, let me stop you right there. We do have to take a break. The hour is kind of flying by here with Derrel Sims. We're talking about alien abductions, and believe it or not, whatever your belief system is, Derrel's sharing the scientific proof coming up. Stay tuned. This is the Black Vault Radio.